who will speak for around 15 minutes.
Following last night's horrific news, I just want to send my deepest condolences to the family of Diogo Jota and his brother and to the city of Liverpool. I beg to move the motion in my name on the order paper, and I'd like to pay tribute to the thousands of fearless women who've been campaigning relentlessly to secure justice on this matter for decades now, and to remember all those women who have died waiting for justice. My personal thanks go to the campaign groups who've provided briefings to the all-party parliamentary group on state pension age inequality for women, including CASPI, WASPI, WASPI 2018, CEDAW in Law, Pension Partners for Justice, Pension United, WASPI Scotland and 1950s Women of Wales, as well as many individuals who've been in touch. My thanks also go to the Backbench Business Committee for allowing this debate and numerous colleagues across this House who've been instrumental in campaigning for the women, but also securing today's debate. As Lord Bryn Davies, co-chair of the APPG and a pensions expert, has stated, the UK's pension system was designed for men, by men. It systematically favoured men, with the result that they received higher state pensions and even higher private pensions, hence the gender pensions gap. The only feature that favoured women was that the national insurance pension was paid to women from age 60, whereas it was paid to men from age 65. But in 2010, that single advantage was taken away, without consultation and without regard to the other factors that meant women of that era were worse off financially and ended up with worse pensions. Now, that was bad enough. What was worse, though, is that they weren't even told about it. Many women were left destitute, some even lost their homes. They were already disadvantaged and discriminated against. These women began work in an era when it was legal to pay female workers less than men, and they often stepped out of the workforce to raise families or look after loved ones because there was no wraparound care in those days, losing out on paying stamps, but also on paying into private pensions. And overnight, these disgraceful changes were dumped on them without their knowledge. Many had already handed in their notice at work, and in many cases, they were forced to exist on meagre welfare benefits that left them living a hand-to-mouth existence. So hundreds of women started to raise the alarm. And when the previous government failed to take action, they escalated their complaints to the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman, who began a lengthy investigation spanning years. But they only chose a sample of 6 cases to focus on. The report, published in March last year, uncovered internal Department for Work and Pensions memos from 2005 that showed that officials knew considerable numbers of women were unaware of the planned changes. And whilst, of course, many women feel that the report did not go far enough on suggested redress and that it was too limited in the cases that it assessed, it did confirm what the women already knew, that they had suffered injustice, that the DWP was guilty of maladministration in failing to properly communicate changes, and that redress was duly owed. So, when the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions responded to the report in December, there was genuine hope that the scandal would finally end. It was there in black and white. But sadly it didn't, and women were left shocked and angry. Whilst the government agreed with the finding of maladministration and apologised, no redress would be forthcoming, and contrary to the Ombudsman, they actually felt that the majority of women did know about changes to their pension age based on Department for Work and Pensions research, and that sending the women letters would not have been effective, which I'm sure most people would agree is bizarre, because it's pretty effective when a bill addressed to you coming through your door comes through. It's pretty effective when it's a hospital appointment. It's pretty effective on the very rare but joyous occasion that HMRC gives you a tax rebate cheque. So I ask honestly, why would 1950s born women have actively refused to open letters with their name on from the DWP? It makes no sense. I will give way.
So the Honourable Lady for giving way, she's making a really powerful opening statement, and what she says is reflecting some of the conversations I've had with WASPI women in my own constituency about the distress that this has caused them, but also how so many of them said that they just simply didn't receive the correspondence that they've been told that they did receive over the years about the financial situation that was coming down the track for them. She pointed out that the PHSO report found maladministration, and despite promising to address it in their in all their communications before the general election, the government said it was too burdensome to compensate on a flat scale. At the time that that announcement was made, I asked the Secretary of State what else could be done to support these women, many of whom have really struggled as a result of this decision. I didn't have a particularly forthcoming response at that point, but I wonder if the Honourable Lady has had any better joy at hearing what the government is going to do to support these women if they can't bring along the financial support that actually so many of them have missed out on.
Thank the Honourable Lady. She's been a formidable campaigner for these women. But in answer to her question, no, I haven't had any joyous information from the government as yet, which is why we're here today. Because I'll outline throughout the course of my speech why I think the government's statement and response to the Ombudsman's report was misinformed, and whilst I understand the financial difficulties that government faces, there are options available, and cost should never be a barrier to addressing injustice. So many of the campaign groups are also clear that the statistics used by government to justify no redress are misquoted and misinformed, painting a picture that's completely at odds with the experiences of thousands of impacted women, as the Honourable Lady's already outlined, the Ombudsman's findings and independent research results. For example, Department for Work and Pensions research in 2003 showed that only 43% of all women affected by the changes knew that their state pension age was changing. Even that research itself comments, this low figure provides cause for concern and shows that information about the increase in SPA is not reaching the group of individuals who arguably have the greatest need to be informed. Independent research, such as an Age UK focus group study from as late as 2011, also found that many women responding believed they were still going to retire with a state pension at 60. Further, the Ombudsman's report also focused on the continued failure of the DWP to recognise and respond to this research and feedback. Indeed, that was a point that was flagged by the Work and Pensions Committee in 2013 and the National Audit Office in 2016, but the DWP still failed to take any meaningful action. Yes, I will give way.
Grateful to the Honourable Lady for giving way, and I pay tribute to her leadership of this campaign, but it is still worse than she paints it. For the Ombudsman made clear, and I quote, that the DWP had clearly indicated it will refuse to comply with the Ombudsman recommendations and invited Parliament to step in to resolve this matter. So this is officialdom closing ranks, is it not?
The Right Honourable Member is correct, and he's been a formidable campaigner for the women affected and an ally in the campaign in this House. And what he said is correct, and I'll explain in a moment how unprecedented it is for a government to reject the Ombudsman's recommendations in this way, and how dangerous it is, in fact, for our democracy and the ability of citizens to hold its governments to account. Now, back to the statistics that the government relied upon in its response to the Ombudsman's report. Instead of relying on the clear findings that I've outlined, the government relied on abstract figures in 2004 and 2006 Department for Work and Pensions research. And this suggested that 73% and 90% of women born in the 1950s respectively knew that their own state pension age was increasing. That is not correct. And I must flag with the Minister for clarity. The question asked in the surveys was crucial. It was, do you know that the broad state pension age is due to increase at some point in the future? It was not, do you know that your own state pension age is going to increase? So it's wrong, in my view, to make the assertion that 73% and 90% of women knew that their state pension age was changing, because the facts prove that they simply did not. Next, when an ombudsman makes recommendations to government, as the right honourable gentleman has alluded to, the usual course of action is for the government to accept them. Further, on this occasion, the ombudsman made the incredibly rare decision to lodge their report before Parliament, not before the Department for Work and Pensions. And they did this because, based on their dealings with the Department of Work and Pensions, they already feared and knew that they would be ignored. So it was clear the Ombudsman realised that this was an important issue and they wanted government to listen. Now, there have only been 8 other occasions where the Ombudsman has felt the need to put down a special report in this way. The first was in 1978. All resulted in the full recommendations being implemented, save one, which was the Earl report, where an Environment Agency still complied with 3 out of the 4 recommendations, and on the 4th, they implemented an alternative compensation offer instead. So I can't stress enough, the decision to reject the Ombudsman's recommendations in full here is unprecedented, and in fact it's dangerous, because it sets a precedent that regardless of what an independent adjudicator recommends concerning state-level injustice, the government can now ignore them. It strips away one of the only levers citizens have to hold the government of the time to account. Now, all of the amazing campaign groups that we in this House work with are clear. This has been a state injustice. It has caused significant harm to these women, and a limited government apology, whilst welcome, without any material redress, is not acceptable for a grave injustice that has driven so many into debt or poverty. Yes, I will give way.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way and congratulate her on bringing forward this debate here today. She has been a very powerful advocate for the WASPI campaigners, not just in England and Wales, but also in Scotland too, and that's recognised by them. Does she recognise the fact that over the course of recent weeks we've seen that where there is a will, there is a way, and that if her colleagues on the Labour benches were to use their newfound power, perhaps we could find a way of getting the government to right this historic and grievous wrong?
Thank the honourable member for his suggestion, and he is a fantastic campaigner for 1950s women in Scotland and has done an enormous amount of work in this House to support their cause. And as I said earlier, we all recognise the difficulties that the government faces. It inherited a difficult financial inheritance, but that's no excuse to deny these women justice. And there are financial options available, some of which I will outline today, and some of which I'm sure my colleagues will outline too. Now, the government, as well as refuting the findings of the Ombudsman, cites cost and administrative burdens as barriers. But on this point, I think it's important to stress that there have been other large-scale compensation schemes created in response to Department for Work and Pensions and maladministration. The Equitable Life Compensation Scheme is a key example. Yes, I will give way.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way and congratulate her profoundly on getting this debate, which is much needed. Yeah. Would my honourable friend agree with me that it is shameful that Labour made personal pledges to WASPI women over social media as a vehicle to get elected, but then tossed aside those promises and turned their backs on more than 7,000 women, such as Jill in Tiverton and Helen in Bampton, in my constituency of Tiverton and Minehead, as well as those across the length and breadth of the country? And does she recognise, as I do, that 74% of the British public support fair compensation for WASPI women?
The Honourable Lady for her comment, and again she's a fantastic campaigner for her constituents during her time in this House. Well, what I would say in response is that this is an issue that unites the House. We're all angry about the injustice that these women have faced, and we want to see the government take action. And spanning various governments and various administrations, these women have had to fight relentlessly just for what they're owed. And that's not acceptable. And I have no doubt that there are numerous colleagues at cabinet level who agree with the women's cause, but maybe struggling to find options and answers. And that's what we're here today in this debate to provide. And I hope that they're listened to, and I hope that they're acted upon. Because injustice is injustice, and if we're to say that victims of one injustice can be compensated by the government, but victims of another don't deserve to, then that is a very, very dangerous path to travel down. And there are options to cover the cost and ensure that there's no heavy administrative burden. And I'll just cover a few of them. The Ombudsman's guidance on financial remedy sets out its suggestion at level 4 on the severity of injustice scale. And they estimate that this would involve public spending of between 3.5 billion and 10.5 billion. Campaigners have suggested that an earlier stage, level 5, was under consideration, and that would cost between 10 billion and 31 billion. But in both cases, as Lord Bryn Davies of Brixton has highlighted, that recommendation, nor any other scheme, does not preclude tapering the amount paid, which would bring down costs considerably. WASPI and its sister campaigns suggest a bell curve model. They've highlighted other large compensation schemes for DWP maladministration have been viable, and proposed that any financial remedy could allocate the most compensation to those who have had the shortest notice of the longest delay to their state pension age, i.e. supporting those most heavily impacted in a bell curve model. They state that redress must be speedy, simple and sensitive, and they want to avoid legal action. They've asked the government to enter into talks to address this very issue. WASPI proposed this could be in the form of a one-off payment that fairly takes this into account, but that level 4 should not be a ceiling, given that not all circumstances are identical to the 6 sample claimants. WASPI Scotland have also highlighted how a scheme could be done relatively easily, using DWP records of dates of birth or national insurance prefixes on an either opt-in or opt-out basis. This information is readily available and would not require complex application systems nor processing of such applications. Oh yes, go on.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way, and she's making an extremely powerful case regarding this long-standing injustice. As she's pointed out, the WASPI women, the campaigners, are making really constructive suggestions to resolve this, offering to reach out and sit around the table with the government. Does she share my frustration that government is refusing to sit around the table and instead effectively forcing a court process which is just leading to longer and longer delays when there's such a clear injustice here and an unprecedented rejection of the PHSO's recommendation?
Yes.
Yep.
Right, and again, a fantastic advocate for the women in her constituency. These women shouldn't be forced to go through lengthy court battles, and the government must recognise the cost of having to undertake those court battles versus the amount that they would actually pay through a redress scheme, when ultimately the court's likely to find in favour of these women based on the facts that we've been presented with as parliamentarians. And indeed, CEDAW in law and 1950s Women of Wales both strongly support a mediation route towards redress via an early, neutral evaluation of groups' asks towards mediation with the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions via mediators. More broadly, they raise concerns that discrimination needs to be factored into any redress mechanism, stating that the rollout of state pension ages potentially conflicts with the UN's Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW Treaty, which the UK signed in 1981, and as such, the government should implement a temporary special measure to guarantee an adequate non-discriminatory pension. Would the Honourable Lady give way? Yes.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Would the Honourable Lady agree with me that after so many years, one of the first constituents who came to me 8 years ago was a WASPI woman, that after so many years and so much compromise on their side and willing to talk to the government, One of the things that matters most to the women, rather than the amount of money, is the actuality and the significance of compensating them after all these years.
The Honourable Lady, spot on. This is an injustice and the women have suffered and they've been ignored and they shouldn't have had to fight for so long. And the sad fact is that so many women have already died waiting to see justice. And what will it take? Will it take an ITV drama to shine a light on what's happened before everybody gets angry enough to do something about it? I don't know. But what I do know is that the facts are clear. Even the Ombudsman's report sets that out, and that the government needs to act urgently. And again, as I say, the Honourable Lady's been a fantastic campaigner in this House over the years, and I'm sure the women are truly thankful for her support. Now, 1950s Women of Wales propose, in line with CEDAW in law, that redress could be an initial lump sum to allow swift financial relief with additional payments over a 5-year period. But even the previous chair of the Department for Work and Pensions Select Committee suggested a scheme. He wrote to the then Secretary of State for Work and Pensions to suggest that a rules-based scheme be considered. The letter describes a system where payments are adjusted within a range based on the Ombudsman's severity of injustice scale to reflect the extent of change in the individual state pension age and the notice of the change the individual received. It will be quick to administer, he said, and inexpensive compared to a more bespoke scheme. And he further suggested that there should also be flexibility for individuals to make a case for additional compensation for direct loss. And do you know what, Madam Deputy Speaker? That Select Committee Chair is now a Minister in the Department for Work and Pensions. Who knew? So perhaps the Minister could sit down and have a cup of tea with him and discuss the plans that he had before he entered office. So, of course, any scheme must also be responsible and it must be financially sustainable. So let's have a look at some options on that too. Yes.
Before Mr Shannon intervenes, can I just respectfully request that the Honourable Lady considers whether she might be able to truncate her speech a little? There are a number of colleagues who will want to get in this afternoon. Jim Shannon.
Madam Speaker, 77,000 WASPI women in Northern Ireland, 7,000 of them in my constituency of Strangford. Has the Honourable Lady, and does she appreciate, I think she does, the palpable anger that they have and how they've been mistreated and the injustice that they wish to see done today? On behalf of them 7,000 of my constituents, I seek the same thing as the Honourable Lady seeks, as we all seek today in this chamber.
Thank you. The Honourable Gentleman is a powerful advocate for women in Northern Ireland, and he's right. It's just wrong. Plain and simple. And we need to see action on this today. And I promise, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am coming to the end now. I don't want to test your patience. Now, in terms of options to make sure that schemes could be financially sustainable, WASPI have calculated that HM Treasury have saved a whopping £181 billion alone by increasing the state pension age. Well, there's other options. There's the options of applying a 1 to 2% wealth tax on assets over 10 million, raising up to 22 billion a year. Equalised capital gains tax with income tax rates, raising £15.2 billion a year. Apply national insurance to investment income, raising £8.6 billion a year. End stealth subsidies on banks, and you get up to £55 billion over the next 5 years. And even Gordon Brown has advocated for this. So cost does not need to be and should not be a barrier to justice. And in January, the Deputy Ombudsman told the Work and Pensions Committee the DWP at the time knew women did not know. They failed to act. If you accept this maladministration and you accept people were affected by that maladministration, there is a conversation about how you factor cost into the need to do justice. So the trauma, hardship, poverty and sheer stress these women have been put through for a decade must make justice for them a matter of urgency. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I call on the Minister today, and I've got a lot of time for him, to listen to these women, get round the table with them, listen to the evidence, put considerations of financial redress for 1950s born women who've suffered back on the table, and present any proposal for full and adequate parliamentary scrutiny as the Ombudsman intended. Thank you.
The question is as on the order paper. Tom Gordon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to be called so early on in this debate, and I would like to congratulate the Honourable Lady for securing this debate. I don't really have much more that can be said. She's put the case so eloquently throughout this debate that we've had so far. For me, I think the key points that I just really want to get down on the record is that I think that, broadly speaking, as the Honourable Lady said, this is an issue that does cross all sides of this House. And there is a broad understanding that this is an injustice, as she so eloquently put and said. And for me, it's about the fairness and about what happens going forward if people lose faith in organisations like the PHSO. I think for me, what I would like to see...
On that point, will my honourable friend give way? I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and I thank the lady for bringing this, the honourable lady for bringing this debate today, and congratulate her on her work. Does my honourable friend agree with me that this is actually about trust, and it's about trust in government, and to betray that trust for all of us who stood there with placards saying, "I support the WASPI women"? They should be following that up.
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and I completely agree with him. And I think, building on from that point, at a time when trust is so low in government, in politicians, I think it's imperative that we all do what we can in this place to right that wrong. And I would like to see a vote, and that's probably the key thing that I would take away from this, is we should have a vote in Parliament about whether or not we should have a fair compensation scheme, just to get an idea of what support there is across this House. Whenever I have WASPI women, either in my own constituency or outside, speak to me, the main thing that they want to have is just to be heard and to be listened to. And that is what I find the key sort of thread that resonates across all these women, is that they feel completely sidelined and ignored. And the point that was made earlier by the member for Tiverton and Minehead is that parties of all persuasions have stood there, have held placards, have made promises, have made pledges, and the Liberal Democrats all too well know about the danger of making promises that you then can't deliver. And I would like to see all parties, all politicians be held accountable for those promises that they failed to deliver. I represent a place that is broadly characterised as fairly affluent and fairly wealthy. There are real issues with poverty in Harrogate and Knaresborough too. It's often hidden. And I think the point that the Honourable Member so eloquently put is that when WASPI women were growing up, when they were working, they were already disadvantaged, and this is yet a further disadvantage. So it is incumbent on us all to right that wrong.
My honourable friend briefly give way. I thank my honourable friend for giving way. And would he agree with me that this is absolutely an issue of justice, but it's also an issue of equality between men and women? And if this government is serious about tackling inequality at all levels, then they must surely listen to the women in all of our constituencies. I've been inundated constituents on this from North Cornwall, and it really is an issue of justice, but also equality that the government must tackle.
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and I completely agree. I don't intend to speak much longer, so I will wrap up. But for me, it is a fundamental flaw of the system. It's a complete failure of the Ombudsman if it can't then enact and can't get us in this place to push for the change that they outlined, the maladministration. This isn't something that's up for debate. That is the results, that is the finding of that report. And I think for me, when you hear those harrowing stories from women who have lost their houses, they have ended up in debt, ended up in all these horrendous situations as a result of something that they didn't know about, it's about fixing that problem and righting that wrong.
Ewan Steinbank.
Speaker, firstly I would like to thank the many women from across Falkirk who have taken their time to campaign on this issue and discuss the injustice done to women affected by state pension age changes and the lack of notification. I'm here on their behalf today. Both the Ombudsman and Ministers in their statement back in December are clear there is an injustice in the way that women impacted by state pension age changes were notified. I invited the WASPI women in Falkirk to meet me in December after the statement from the Secretary of State, and the understanding and collective voice that I took from that meeting is that if we in this place believed that there was no injustice here, compensation would never have been paid regardless of fiscal circumstances. But if we recognise an injustice here, as the Secretary of State and the Ombudsman does, it is only justified to expect that we deliver a form of the recommended redress of the Ombudsman's findings. On behalf of the WASPI women in Falkirk who raised and continue to raise these questions with me, I will use this opportunity to ask again some of the questions I've previously raised with the Minister, and I'd welcome him addressing these in his summing up. Why can the Government choose when and when not to implement Ombudsman recommendations? Is the 90% awareness figure used by the Government derived from a study specific to women who have been impacted by the pension age changes? And is this decision based on cost or genuine disagreement with the findings of the Ombudsman? Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And it's often said in times of financial crisis that some institutions are too big to fail. Unfortunately, in this case, it's a question of some campaigns being seen as too big to succeed. I'm quite sure that the real reason that the DWP is so resistant about this is not because it doesn't recognise the justice of the WASPI women's cause, so eloquently set out by the Honourable Lady for Salford, who has given excellent leadership through the all-party parliamentary group to this cause. It's because they are simply putting forward behind the scenes, even though I don't know it, but I am sure that I'm right, arguments along the lines of there are so many of them, the bill will simply be too great, and what's more, they're only going to get between £1,000 and £3,000 each, which won't really be anything like full financial compensation. So what's the point of giving in to this particular demand? I'm quite sure that if the numbers were fewer and that the overall bill would not be so significant, then we would not be seeing this resistance to an obviously valid and viable cause. Of course I will.
Does he agree with me that you cannot put a price on justice?
I do indeed, and of course, in any event, the women themselves realise that they are not going to get anything like full compensation, but what they want is the symbolic acceptance and acknowledgement of the injustice that they have received. And in resisting this, as we have heard from both sides of the House, what is at stake is the credibility of the Ombudsman system itself. And to undermine that is to have a knock-on effect in many future cases when the bills of implementing an ombudsman's recommendations and findings would not be anything like as large as this, but it will embolden people and institutions to defy the ombudsman in the future. Now, one of the best short summaries of the case was put forward in a previous Labour manifesto, which said, and I quote, "A generation of women born in the 1950s have had their pension age changed without fair notification. This betrayal left millions of women with no time to make alternative plans, with sometimes devastating personal consequences. Labour recognises this injustice and will work with these women to design a system of recompense for the losses and insecurity they have suffered." Now, admittedly, that was the 2019 manifesto, and Labour at that time was led by the Right Honourable Member for Islington North. And just because that was the case doesn't mean that it was wrong in what it said. It was absolutely right in the way that it summarised it and in the way that it recognised that something must be done. And indeed, when the present Secretary of State for Work and Pensions was in opposition in the last Parliament, she was cautious in what she said, but she did acknowledge the following. She said, "We will take time to give the report of the Ombudsman proper consideration too, and continue to listen respectfully to the women who have been affected, as we have done from the start." And then she added, "We won't be able to right every wrong overnight." Now, that would have been the basis for at least an attempt to give the symbolic redress and acknowledgement that I think most fair-minded people agree is due. If the government had come back and said, well, we can't implement the Ombudsman's recommendations in full at the moment, but we shall try and do it in stages or over a period, or at least go some way in order to give this symbolic acceptance of the wrong that has been done, I think most reasonable people would have understood the situation and would have been willing at least to consider some sort of compromise in that way. I certainly will.
Would the honourable member perhaps agree with me that this is not just an issue of policy and of these things, but it's also really a matter of dignity? That these women's voices must be heard, and that the government has a responsibility to honour commitments made, to give fair treatment, and to ensure that something is done about this.
Well, yes, and I think in a way the government has sort of fallen between two stools. You see, the report, as we've heard, anticipated that the government was going to be reluctant to right the wrong that had been done to so many people at once. But nevertheless, the PHSO felt that justice required compensation to be paid. And it must have meant a lot to the Ombudsman, knowing that there was going to be this government resistance, that it still went down this highly unusual route of trying to present its report directly to Parliament, because it felt it wasn't going to get very far with dealing with the government itself directly. Now, one might, as I say, have expected the government to offer a scheme that fell some way short of the Ombudsman's recommendation, but its outright rejection of any restitution at all is rather insulting to the women whose complaint was upheld by the Ombudsman. And as we have heard, despite claiming to accept the findings and even apologising for its own maladministration, the DWP is not offering a penny in restitution, but also is relying in its response on a deeply unconvincing polling exercise, supposedly finding that 9 out of 10 of the affected women knew in advance that their state pension age was going to change. Well, if that was the case, why did so many of them carry on as if nothing was going to change at all? And in reality, in the answer to the honourable gentleman's question that he referred to a few moments ago, when he asked about the nature of the sampling that was done, in reality, only some 200 women born in the 1950s were included in the sample of nearly 2,000 people who were surveyed and which led to that misleading result. So I conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, in appealing to the Minister, who I know has a great deal of expertise and a very strong track record on issues of this sort from his former career before he came into this House, at least to reach out the hand of negotiation and discussion and accept the offer that reasonable people are making to the government, sit down with them, talk to them, don't let the whole thing go through the courts with adversarial deepening of hostility and inevitably a less desirable outcome for everyone concerned.
And with an immediate 4-minute time limit, Brian Leishman.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thanks go to my friend, the Honourable Member for Salford, for bringing this debate today and for her, as usual, excellent contribution. It was quite the sight yesterday, Madam Deputy Speaker, seeing female parliamentarians don green, white and purple sashes in commemoration of it being 97 years since women won the vote. It seems unthinkable that women would be denied political representation, but then again, women have been the victims of inequality for centuries, and the pension inequality women born in the 1950s suffer from shows that the political battle has somewhat changed, but prejudice and unfairness still exists. Madam Deputy Speaker, I imagine that some colleagues may feel somewhat uncomfortable at what I'm about to say, but Madam Deputy Speaker, I believe it needs said. Because if you support campaigns like WASPI or nuclear test victims or the Hillsborough Law, while in opposition, and then you find yourself in front bench roles in government, well, you should do everything you can to deliver on justice, like you said you would, while holding a placard or a banner. Because support and solidarity for people like WASPI women is not transactional. Solidarity is not a campaigning tool. Madam Deputy Speaker, I have campaigned for WASPI women to receive justice, and that's why I co-sponsored the 10-minute rule bill for compensation in January. And for years, governments have refused to deliver justice to WASPI women. That is wrong. To not deliver that justice seems like one of those quote-unquote tough decisions politicians have to take. But the truth is that it is a choice, and it always seems to be working-class people that are on the wrong end of those choices. A Labour government should instead be taking different choices, as highlighted by my honourable friend from Salford. Because I, like many, believe that the Labour Party is the vehicle for social, political and economic change. And a year ago tomorrow, people voted for change. A change from austerity, its social consequences, and a government that denied fairness to victims of many different scandals and injustices. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, before I finish, I would also like to mention the ladies from the Falkirk WASPI branch. We met at my constituency office, we sat, they spoke, and I listened to their very legitimate anger at the Secretary of State's announcement from last December. And their hurt today is as palpable as it was when we met in the new year. So, to finish, I just urge the government to do the right thing.
Ben Lake.
It's a pleasure to follow the honourable member for Alloa and Grangemouth, and I should like to begin by congratulating the honourable member for Salford for securing this debate and for being such a champion of this cause throughout the many years. And Madam Deputy Speaker, it has been too many years that we've had to debate this injustice in this House, whether on these green benches or indeed in other chambers on the estate. And it is a point of great sorrow for me personally that one of my first speeches as a Member of Parliament back in 2017 was on this injustice, and little could I have imagined back then that I'd be a little bit older, 3 elections down, and still having to debate the injustice that has befallen so many 1950s born women. I think the Honourable Lady for Salford covered the entire injustice so eloquently that I only want to add a few more points, or to emphasise a few points, and that they are as follows, Madam Deputy Speaker. The first is that we are talking here of a generation of women that I highly, highly admire. They were women that suffered injustice and indeed throughout their working lives great disadvantages. They were often not paid in line with their male colleagues. They were also not entitled to the same opportunities when it came to private pensions, for example. And that injustice itself, I think, is important to highlight because it does bear relevance on what we are talking about today. Now, we are, of course, aware of the changes that were initiated by the 2 Pension Acts that caused the change to the state pension age for 1950s born women. But I think what is really unacceptable is that having brought the injustice to our attention, members of Parliament from across the island of Great Britain and indeed Northern Ireland, the fact of the matter is we asked many women in our constituencies to organise, to campaign. We asked them diligently to undertake the various processes that were available to them to right this wrong, and it all culminated with the Ombudsman process. And the Ombudsman, as we've already heard, found that there had been maladministration, that there has been an injustice, and that far too many 1950s born women have suffered as a consequence. I think it is absolutely outrageous, therefore, that we then have a government not only disregarding the recommendations in part or trying to water them down, but dismissing them outright. And as other right honourable members have already made it very eloquently, this goes to the very heart of our democracy and indeed faith in the administrations and the institutions of the state to right these terrible wrongs. Now, I understand from representations made by the campaign groups in my own constituency, both the WASPI and the 1950s born women of Wales,
that they are keen to seek this resolution to ensure some justice for them and their fellow 1950s-born women. And they're being very pragmatic, Madam Deputy Speaker. They are willing to speak and discuss with the government. And that, I suppose, is what I would plead with the Minister today, is to reconsider the opportunity that has been presented by these groups to discuss other ways of bringing a resolution forward so that 1950s-born women can at long last have some justice, because we shouldn't force them to go through the judicial review process and drag them through the courts. Far too long, far too many years have already been spent righting this wrong, and I will end on this point. We can't delay any further, because estimates suggest that over 300,000 1950s-born women have already passed away since this injustice came to light. And that is, I understand, equivalent to another 1950s-born woman dying every 12 minutes. So there is an opportunity here to get back around the table, and I would urge the Minister and the Government to do so.
John MacDonald.
I just want to put on the record my thanks to my right honourable friend for this campaign. Reference has been made to the manifesto in 2019. The right honourable lady and I wrote that section, and what we'd done is we'd worked with the WASPI on all the campaigns, with Lord Bryn Davies. We, in the modern language, we co-produced a scheme at that point, and we looked at how much they'd been, how much they'd lost, how much they'd been robbed. Which is about 200 million. And they asked for 25% back, just a quarter back. And it was expensive, of course it was. But there was a window of opportunity, because we said, actually, we'd borrow that and we'd pay it out over a 5-year period. And at that point in time, interest rates were so low, in fact, some of them were going to negative interest rates, we could afford it. And we lost that window of opportunity. And I'm angry that that happened. I'm angry, because I don't know of any MP, exactly as has been said, that wasn't photographed behind a poster supporting the campaign. And that campaign, I pay tribute to the campaign. A lot of those ladies have been patronised over the years. It was a terrific campaign. In fact, it was so terrific, under this government at the moment, they'd most probably be prescribed. But there you are. I think now we all recognise there's an injustice. We all accept that. We all know that the DWP operated effectively a sexist policy. They admit it now. And I don't believe the Honourable Gentleman said, well, it's just a matter of principle. I don't think it is a matter of principle. I actually think it's a matter of hard cash as well, because large numbers of people are still suffering poverty as a result of what's gone on. All I want is a fair settlement, and that's all they're asking for. And they're not going, well, some of them have gone away because they've died, but they're not going to go away. This campaign isn't going to go away. We're not going to let it go away until we get justice for these women. And so, therefore, what the Ombudsperson has done is put it back to this House. So we should be demanding in this House that this House determines the scheme itself and is allowed to vote on that scheme. And I say this, that, you know, their budget is coming up in November. There'll be a number of us who say we're not willing to support a budget unless there's something within that budget for these women. Why should we? Why should we let it go on again for another year while people have suffered and this justice goes unremedied? I'm angry about it because, as I say, all the promises that have been given over the years, and they've been reneged upon and dishonoured. And I don't think that's the way we should act as representatives of our communities. I want to be able to go back and say, at least what the government is now going to do is offer you negotiations, and then it's going to report to the House, and it's going to let this House determine the nature of that scheme that will happen. And I want that done within months, not years dragging on again, while others suffered in poverty and others lose their lives and actually lose the hope of compensation. So let's make that commitment today. I don't expect the Minister to say much today other than what's been regurgitated year after year, to be honest. But let us as an assemblage of people make that commitment today and say we're going to keep coming back over these coming months until we secure that commitment from government. And I'd like it to be a cross-party commitment on all the front benches to sign up to, so that we can have some confidence that will be delivered. Because, to be honest, like the WASPI women, I've just had enough. I've had enough of these debates. I've had enough of promises not delivered. And I've had enough of watching the suffering that's gone on in all our communities that these women have had to endure because of this injustice and inequity.
Seamus Logan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and first of all, I want to congratulate the member for Salford on securing this debate and for a tremendously eloquent speech, which has removed much of what I have to say. In fact, so many members have made such eloquent speeches. But in all honesty, eloquent speeches is not going to cut it. It just won't do the trick. We need some action. And I note, with the exception of those who are present here today, the absence of so many Labour MPs who, as others have referred to, stood with placards in support of the WASPI case. Where are they today? Do they not understand the betrayal, the sense of betrayal that's out there, the sense of breach of promise, the sense of a breakdown of trust? And that's the problem that many of them will face in due course. The member for Harrogate and Knaresborough referred to, I think he's not in this place any longer, accountability. Well, there is accountability, and it comes at the next election when people get the chance to pass their verdict. I'm not going to repeat so many of the things that the Honourable Member for Salford said, but I do want to highlight a couple of things. The PHSO said, and I quote, "Some women lost opportunities to make informed decisions about their finances." And they also said that Parliament should identify a mechanism for providing appropriate remedy for those who had suffered this injustice. Now, when the budget was announced, there was great expectation that there would be something in it for the WASPI women. Nothing. Nothing. Even though the DWP accepted the PHSO's findings and apologised not once, but twice. Now, if you take my wallet and I discover that, and I come to you, do you think an apology will suffice? No, I'll want my wallet back. This is the point. An apology just won't cut it. A great number of women affected by this maladministration are in my constituency and across Scotland, many, many thousands. On the 17th of March, I participated in the debate. In fact, in my maiden speech, I mentioned the WASPI women's case, and I believe the Honourable Member for Salford spoke straight after myself, and indeed the member for New Forest East was here that day as well. Many, many others have a much longer record in campaigning for this issue. I don't want to go on too long. Many of the points have already been made, but I just want to highlight one last thing. The most distasteful aspect of this profound failure of the UK government was the photograph of the current Secretary of State for Work and Pensions posing with WASPI campaigners, smiling and holding a sign pledging, "I will work with WASPI to identify and deliver a fair solution for all women affected." That is frankly shameful. But there is one gap out. In fact, there are a number of ways, and we've already heard some ways in which this can be redressed. But here's one. My honourable friend, the member for Aberdeen South, will tomorrow be representing his bill on Women's State Pension Age Ombudsman Report and Compensation Scheme Bill. He'll be presenting it tomorrow. And if members haven't signed, they've still got the opportunity to sign their support for that bill. They've got an opportunity tomorrow when it will be presented to the Chair. So we in the SNP understand the issues that are involved here. We will continue to support and speak out against this injustice, and I thank the members for listening to me.
Mary Glindon.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for securing this bid from the Backbench Business Committee, of which I am a member, and for her most eloquent and informative speech. Financial security is something we endeavour to secure for our families and for ourselves, and many 1950s women worked their whole lives with the goal of financial security in their mind's eye, only for it to be effected through no fault of their own. And I won't rehearse the Ombudsman's judgment, which stands as clear as day. We've heard the words time and time again, specifically because they've not been appropriately remedied. What never fails to provide a sense of shock are the lived experiences. The testimony of 1950s women are so important because the impact of their story never diminishes. This is about real women. My constituent Anne is just one of the many 1950s women who won't accept that finding as a remedy to the DWP's maladministration is neither fair nor feasible or would not represent good value for taxpayers. When Anne was 57, she applied for a pension forecast upon receiving it and discovered that her retirement age was 66 rather than 60. Not long before this shocking news, she went from working 5 days a week to 3. How was she to know she had to work and plan for retirement over a further 6 years? She was never informed. Because she was now working part-time, it was not possible for her to substantially increase her pension contributions. In 2020, at the age of 63, Anne was made redundant. She had to make her small redundancy payment last her until she retired 3 years later. Life has been tough for these women. There have been events like the pandemic, when Anne lost her job, that shook us all. But events where the state has made people's lives more difficult just because of the day they were born have a particular degree of unfairness to them. Given the Ombudsman's significant concerns that the DWP would fail to remedy the injustice, they deliberately laid their report before Parliament when the Government announced its position in relation to the findings, made incredibly without recourse to Parliament. This reaffirmed the Ombudsman's concerns and sets a worrying precedent for the future. Madam Deputy Speaker, we have high hopes for our Pensions Minister, as we know his past life, dedicated to improving the living standards, makes him well suited to the role he now holds. And I truly hope that he will re-examine the government's position on the issue that is so important to so many women who continue to fight for their justice.
Connor Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The purpose of this place is, of course, to make laws, to amend them, and sometimes, in the opposition that is, to stop laws being made. But it has another purpose, and that purpose is to hold those with power to account. And we do that as individual constituency MPs all the time, do we not? Taking up cases on behalf of individuals. But this case not only affects the WASPI women in my constituency, I take it up for all the WASPI women, inspired by the leadership of the Honourable Member, my friend, the Honourable Member for Salford, and others across this House. For it is unusual in this place for government members of Parliament, Labour MPs, the official opposition, Conservatives, the Liberal Democrats, the SNP, the DUP, Plaid Cymru, to all come together in common cause. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, that speaks volumes. It speaks volumes that we recognise that these women were unjustly treated. And it's not just our recognition that counts. The Ombudsman recognised exactly that. When an Ombudsman says, we find maladministration in DWP's communication about the 1995 Pension Act result in complainants' lasting opportunities to make informed decisions about some things, do some things differently, diminish their sense of personal autonomy and financial control, and that's just one of their findings. For throughout that Rumbles report, maladministration, inappropriate communications, the failure to deal with complaints punctuate the Ombudsman's findings, and for a government not to respond to the Ombudsman is frankly unacceptable. So in making this case, we are speaking not solely about the particularities of the WASPI women. We're speaking... I will happily give way.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. Would he agree with me that taking this step to ignore the findings of an ombudsman sets a really dangerous precedent that could then be exploited by companies privately, but also government departments?
I do agree with that. It was a case powerfully made by the Honourable Lady from Salford, that this is very much about the relationship between the Ombudsman and government, and this House and government. And that connection between independent scrutiny by the Ombudsman and our ability as a House to hold the government to account does light the heart of this, and that was exactly what I was about to say. So it is about the WASPI women, it's about something still more profound. And I hope the Minister will recognise that in the decisions that he takes, he will set an important precedent, a precedent which affects exactly those kind of relationships. Now, I will reveal to the House what the Minister already knows, and that is that when this matter was considered by ministers, a submission would have come forward from officials. And I have no doubt at all it would have offered several options. Option A might have been to satisfy the WASPI women in full. Option B might have come to a partial settlement that they perhaps would have accepted. Option C would have been to do nothing. And the government chose, despite all the pledges and opposition by the Deputy Prime Minister, the Work and Pensions Secretary, the Prime Minister himself, to take that final option of doing nothing. I find that very surprising, because had a partial settlement been offered, I suspect, knowing how reasonable the campaigners are, they might well have met the government halfway. They might have understood that the cost was substantial and that they had to compromise to some degree. Except for this, let's just explode one myth, that all of these women are privileged and advantaged. Many were not. Many, when they faced a longer period before they could retire, were in ill health. Many had caring responsibilities. Many were hard up. So in campaigning for these women, and mindful of those disadvantages, we are speaking for people that otherwise would be powerless. And I say to the Minister, it's not too late to get this right. For the WASPI women have a just cause. And surely, in the name of decency, as well as the name of good democracy, justice must be done.
Douglas McAllister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I fully understand that the government decision announced in December last year was not about the changes to state pension age from 1995 onwards, but rather how decisions made by the Department between 2005 and 2007 led to a 28-month delay in sending out letters to those affected by those changes. In March 2024, the PHSO Stage 2 and 3 report found clear maladministration in the way the DWP communicated state pension age changes. This fact cannot be disputed. As a direct result of that, many women born in the 1950s were left with little or no time to make alternative plans and therefore suffered injustice. Again, this is clear and obvious, I would suggest, to all. Figures from Age Scotland suggest that around 336,000 women were impacted in Scotland, and over 5,000 of those were in my West Dunbartonshire constituency, my WASPI women. Like Elizabeth Daly, Elaine Newfield and Maureen McGrath, I could list hundreds who have contacted me to share their own personal stories to help me understand that this is not just about figures or statistics. Liz, who cared for her desperately ill husband, her retirement plan wrecked, their lives destroyed, years of suffering. Maureen, penalised because she retired at the age of 60 to care for her elderly mother. She lost out on accessing a full state retirement pension. But what all my WASPI women say to me is that it's not about the level of need or the amount of compensation now at this stage. It's simply about justice. Therefore, the UK Government was right to recognise the injustice suffered by WASPI women in its statement to the House on the 17th of December and to apologise for the maladministration that affected women across the UK. And of course, the steps set out by the Government to ensure this does not happen again are welcome. But we must learn the lessons and always set a clear timetable of notice of any future state pension age changes. However, an apology is not enough. I urge my government colleagues to look again at the Ombudsman's report and all its recommendations, refusing to comply with those instructions, refusing to set up a compensation scheme for maladministration, ignoring this key element of the Ombudsman's report not only undermines its role and function, it is, in this context, unprecedented and sets us on a very dangerous path. For any government to reject the recommendations of the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman is extremely rare. Between 2018 and 2021, the PHSO made a total of 811 compensation recommendations. Only one of these was not complied with, 99.9% accepted. Therefore, this is highly unusual and, in my opinion, corrosive. I will conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, by suggesting that we should be avoiding unnecessary court actions. Let's get round the table with our WASPI women. Let's avoid years of court battles similar to the other scandals over the last few decades. Let's urgently review and explore what schemes this government can consider and offer financial redress to the 1950s women who deserve justice and deserve to be properly compensated for past governments' maladministrations. Thank you.
Jarvis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on behalf of the 5,180 women in my constituency of Eastleigh impacted by state pension age inequality, and for the thousands of women across the country who were victims of DWP maladministration. As I said in the debate in Westminster Hall in March, we know that the government is facing incredibly difficult challenges, but ignoring the voices of thousands of women is a huge mistake. This issue is not going to go away. My constituent Chrissy received her state pension 6 years later than she was expecting. She told me those lost years weren't just numbers, they were years of struggle, uncertainty and hardship. The silence from the government is a cruel erasure of our lives. The government says it's too expensive to compensate us, but it was never too expensive for us, yet we had to live with the cost and the hardship every single day. Many of the women in my constituency who were impacted were left with very little to live on, blindsided by the sudden loss of income. They were forced to return to work in low-paid jobs to get by, and in some cases to food banks. The toll on their lives and their families should not be underestimated. These women spent decades working, raising families, and often taking on unpaid caregiving roles. Many continue to shoulder caring responsibilities today. The way they have been treated by successive governments is nothing short of disgraceful. Madam Deputy Speaker, my constituents' stories are echoed across the country. The WASPI campaign estimates that 3.8 million women have been affected, women who have been treated appallingly and feel that they do not matter and are invisible. I would urge the government to stop gaslighting them and start listening, really listening, to the pain, injustice and betrayal they have endured. The refusal to provide compensation is not only morally indefensible, but as the member for Salford said, it sets a dangerous precedent. If government departments can accept maladministration yet ignore the Ombudsman's remedy, then the entire purpose of independent oversight collapses. So today I am calling again on the government to do the right thing and compensate the women who were unfairly impacted by the changes to state pension age, because it is the right thing to do. How much longer do these women have to wait for the government to U-turn on state pension age inequality and give them the compensation they deserve?
Susan Murray.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you to the Honourable Member for Salford for championing the cause of WASPI women who have been utterly failed by successive governments. I won't repeat what others have said, but it's clear that the government should be acting on the Ombudsman report after the maladministration of the DWP. I have spoken to women in my constituency of Mid Dunbartonshire, WASPI Scotland and across the UK. These are women who have historically faced systemic inequalities, lower wages, difficulty accessing the same work opportunities as men. They've disproportionately shouldered caring responsibilities as primary carers for children and later frequently caring for elderly relatives and loved ones with disabilities. Without acknowledgement, they continue to give their unpaid labour, which significantly reduces pressures and costs on our NHS and social care services. I myself am one of these women. After a family illness, my life changed in an instant. I had to stop working and became a carer. I had to be at home. If I wasn't fortunate enough to still have my health and strength to become a counsellor later in life, when my caring responsibilities allowed, and now an MP, I would have been reliant on my state pension and a very small private pension due to circumstances totally out with my control. The reality is that I am far from being alone in finding myself with caring responsibilities or indeed with ill health, and many of my counterparts aren't in my fortunate position. WASPI women, like myself, worked hard, paid into the system and looked forward to their retirement based on their understanding of the system at the time. At times when others were planning their pensions, they were in low-paid jobs which were flexible enough to allow them to continue with family commitments. When it became clear that corrective action was necessary, the government first exploited the plight of these women for political gain, then, once in power, ignoring the promises they had made to win their seats. Most troubling is the government's continued refusal to access, despite the Ombudsman's extraordinary call for parliamentary intervention. Rather than providing decisive leadership and delivering justice, the government has delayed, deflected and evaded accountability. Madam Deputy Speaker, if the government is sincere about fairness, integrity and honouring its commitments to support working people, it must go beyond expressions of sympathy. Concrete steps must be taken to deliver the Ombudsman's recommendation, recognising both the scale of the injustice and the dignity of those involved. These women deserve better. They spent their lives working and contributing to our society, preventing costs for the NHS. We must value their contribution and thank them. Implementing the advice of the Ombudsman is the least the government can do. And for those women who, like me, are fortunate to have a higher income after reaching state pension age, then the HMRC and the tax system will effectively claw back a large proportion of any redress and return it to the Treasury. Thank you.
Iqbal Mohammed.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I stand here today in support of the WASPI Women 6020 in my constituency of Dewsbury and Backley and every single WASPI woman across the UK. I want to begin by congratulating my right honourable friend, the member for Salford, for securing this crucial debate and for her powerful, compelling speech, clearly presenting the case, the evidence and the injustice that these women have suffered and the clear need to address the injustice through payment of compensation by implementing the recommendations of the Ombudsman. So without wanting to repeat any of the points made, I'm just going to read out some specific comments from my constituents in Dewsbury and Backley. Virginia, a constituent who wrote to me just after I became elected, writes, "I'm absolutely devastated and feel betrayed. For years, senior Labour representatives and even the Prime Minister himself pledged to deliver fair compensation to those impacted. They have now made a political choice to break that promise and to ignore the findings of an independent watchdog. The DWP got it wrong and they cannot simply adopt a pick and mix approach to which elements of an independent ombudsman's conclusions they find convenient." She goes on to say that furthermore, in recent months, all pensioners losing their winter fuel allowance have been written to directly. Why does the government not feel this would have made a difference to WASPI women? Another constituent, Anne, writes, "I need to vent my frustration and anger at the government's announcement yesterday that they will not accept the Ombudsman's recommendation to pay WASPI women some compensation for maladministration. They were in support of this whilst they were in opposition. This is a complete betrayal and a breach of trust between our people that we represent and this place, and it must be reversed." She also goes on to say, "The people making these decisions are in fortunate positions themselves, but Anne was relying on their understanding and compassion for others who are less able to make up the circa £48,000 which she reckons to have lost." Paula writes to me and says, "As you know, thousands of women living in Dewsbury were impacted. including me, we were left with little time to make alternative plans for our retirement and have been affected by the lack of notice ever since. She actually raises a really critical point. She says she had no notification from the DWP at all until she wrote to them asking for clarification in 2006, when they replied and said she would be able to retire at 65, which was a shock. In 2011, when an extra year was added, they didn't communicate to her then either. So in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, as my right honourable friend, the member for Salford, has stated and clearly explained, the government's justification for not paying compensation are absolutely flawed. The argument that it's too costly or complex to compensate is untrue. The Ombudsman wrote in the findings, finite resources should not be an excuse to avoid a fair remedy. So I repeat the calls of the members across the House for the government to reverse its decision, to bring a vote on compensation to this House, and to engage in out-of-court talks with WASPI women.
James McCleary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and my thanks to the Honourable Member for Salford for bringing forward this debate. I thought she spoke superbly and with great passion on the subject. December last year marked a shameful day for this government. Millions of women born in the 1950s, women who have given a lifetime of service, hard work and care to their families, communities and country, were utterly betrayed. I felt that the Honourable Member for South Holland and Deepings gave a superb speech as ever, but I would take slight issue with one thing he said. He said that the government did nothing. If only they had done nothing, I think we would be in a better situation than we are. Instead, despite the clear evidence from the Parliamentary Ombudsman of maladministration by the Department for Work and Pensions, the government decided there would be no financial compensation, no justice, only betrayal. That was a choice that they made on behalf of these women. Women who faced significant hardship because they were not properly informed about changes to the state pension age. An apology, while necessary, is simply not enough. You cannot apologise for maladministration and then refuse to put things right. It is disgraceful to acknowledge an injustice but refuse to fix it. These women deserve fairness, they deserve dignity, and they deserve compensation. We know exactly why the government won't act. Other honourable members have mentioned it. It comes down to money. For years, the Liberal Democrats have championed the cause of WASPI women, amongst others. We've consistently called for fair and proper compensation in line with the Ombudsman's recommendations. In my constituency, I've seen firsthand how deeply this injustice has affected women's lives. They've worked hard, planned carefully and trusted this government to keep its promises, only to be badly let down. I'd like to share the story quickly of my constituent Helen from Seaford, who's part of my local WASPI group. She was shocked to hear about the changes in 2012. In a letter informing her that the age at which she was due to retire would rise from 60 to 65. Unbelievably, Madam Deputy Speaker, this was only 2.5 years before she was due to retire. This meant she had to work an extra 6 years to be able to properly support her daughter. Helen spent 50 years paying national insurance as a single parent. She told me that she was so angry about what she had worked for had been taken away from her. I'm sure this House will agree Helen's resilience and determination is inspiring, but she should never have been placed in this position. This government made a cynical calculation that these women can be ignored, that they won't fight back, won't keep pushing, but they do underestimate the strength and determination of women across this country, including in my constituency, who have stood up and demanded fairness. This decision cannot and must not stand. It is a bitter irony that the very people that this government said they would stand up for and fight for, they are now fighting in court. I urge the government to reconsider its position, listen to reason, and finally do the right thing and compensate these women now.
Jim Shannon.
Madam Deputy Speaker, a real pleasure to speak in this, and can I first of all thank the Honourable Lady for Salford for setting the scene so incredibly well, and all those members who have contributed. Right honourable members have made a real fantastic demand on behalf of their constituents. This is not a new issue, Madam Deputy Speaker. We know that, and I don't think there's a WASPI debate that I've missed. Indeed, I think the right honourable gentleman to my right hand side of the Deepings will be one of those who has not missed one of these either in the time that I've been here. This week in this House, has given me hope that perhaps government can acknowledge when moving in the wrong direction, and of course government need to correct the wrong steps taken and follow through on recommendations contained within the Ombudsman report. Northern Ireland has some 77,000 WASPI women. 7,000 of them are my constituents. I don't know all 7,000 personally, and I haven't done that roll call, but I know those who have come to me have told me their stories. In many cases, they're ladies who have probably cleaned floors, cleaned offices, who have been classroom assistants, who have been teachers. The age catches up on us all, Madam Deputy Speaker, catches up on me as well, catches up on them. Their knees aren't as strong as they used to be, so it means that when they planned all of those pensions in accordance with the timescale and then found it was taken away from them. So that's the concern that I have. They planned and their life was planned and then it was deprived. The report rightly found that some WASPI women were not informed about the changes in their pensions and had planned long-term financial plans based on the assumption that they would receive their state pensions at 60. All their financial plannings were all in place and then it was just taken away. This meant that when WASPI women lost their pensions, they lost all sources of income and were met with unexpected financial insecurity. The insufficient information was not only negligent but deeply unjust, and government have acknowledged this to be the case. So there is a precedent, and the honourable gentleman who spoke before me was right to say that there was a process which was backed away from. The women who have spent decades raising families, paying taxes, contributing to the economy were left without recognition for their hard work. Many WASPI women were forced back into the workforce, often with disabilities, often into low-paying jobs, or had no choice but to apply for benefits. This is something that those women should have never had to do after a lifetime of contributing to the system. A number of these women, the silent generation I call them, still face significant outstanding debts and loans that they struggle to pay off for the rest of their lives due to the inability to appropriately manage their income, and then realising they couldn't access their pensions and the ability to go back to full-time hours is not a simple step. Not only this, but the emotional toll has been significant as well. Many WASPI women now experience stress, they experience depression, brought about by financial uncertainty. It's only fair that the hard and consistent work done by these ladies is financially recognised. One of the first steps of this government, I say this with respect to the Minister when I make this comment, was to sort out the back pay of the union workers. I'm not saying they shouldn't, by the way. That's not one thing I'm saying. But what I am saying, if there's going to be fairness in this system, I cannot for the life of me understand how they can do this in one breath and then next to apologise to the WASPI women and not do right by them. So the silent generation are determined to be silent no longer. I applaud them. I applaud them for going against the grain, as we often say at home, for continuing to complain. I applaud them for continuing to speak when many of them have been told to be quiet and give it up. I applaud them for continuing to hold government, this one and the last one as well, to account. I applaud them for standing beside the weary and the worn and demanding compensation for all effect. I applaud them for applauding and for not apologising is not enough, Madam Deputy Speaker. We must have, as the Honourable Gentleman in front of me said, it's not words anymore, it's action, and now's the time. Thank you. Yeah.
I refuse to believe that age is catching up with the Honourable Gentleman. Liberal Democrat spokesperson Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I too would like to congratulate the Honourable Lady for Salford on securing this debate, for her campaigning on this issue and making sure this debate comes to the main chamber as well. And I'd like to thank all honourable members for their contributions this afternoon, as well as hearing the very strong and powerful case around this particular issue. We've heard personal examples as well. And whether it's Jill from Tiverton, whether it's Anne from Newcastle, Helen from Seaford or Paula from Dewsbury, we have heard that many women, quite rightly, feel this sense of a raw injustice, and the government must act. Madam Deputy Speaker, I have met WASPI women many times in this place, in Parliament, but also in my own constituency. And a couple of years before I was elected, I met a group of 30 WASPI women, and I regret that I don't remember the name of the woman whose case I remember, but her circumstances stuck with me because she was quite quietly spoken. You could tell that she had a real rage and a fury inside her, but she wasn't prepared to show it. And she just said, "I've spent my entire life working. I've raised a family. I've watched the pennies, and I was proud to stand on my own 2 feet. But at the end of my working life, I felt robbed. Robbed of my money and robbed of my dignity. And even though I know this is a situation not of my making and not of my fault, I feel a tremendous sense of shame. And that, Madam Deputy Speaker, really stuck with me. And every single woman, 3.8 million women who are affected by this, many of them feel that sense of shame, which they shouldn't, but they do. And it's really, really frustrating that the government, notwithstanding the terrible inheritance it received, has chosen to do nothing. There are two problems facing the government. The first is that this is an obvious injustice that is unaddressed. And the second, as so many members across this House have said, it sets a very dangerous precedent. For some women, an offer of an apology or a payment might be symbolic. But for many of these women, it is far more than that. It is survival, and it's helping them get out of the struggle that they are now in. I urge the government, on behalf of my party, to please reflect after this debate, to go back to the drawing board and think about what can be done. And at the very least, think of something to help those women who are struggling the most. Doing nothing is really not an option. And if the rebellion earlier this week was for any reason at all, it was to really send a message to this government that its own party, that this House and the British public want a government that will stand up for the underdog, those who are hard done by life, by government, by circumstances out of their control. And so I hope the government does listen today. I hope the government does act, because to govern is to choose, and the government must know that it is not too late to make a different choice.
Shadow Minister Danny Kruger.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. And let me start by giving credit where it's due to the Right Honourable Lady for her very powerful speech and for all the work that she's done on this campaign over the years, and indeed to many other honourable members opposite who have spoken so well today and for some time, particularly member for Hayes and Harlington, who I always listen to with respect on this topic and indeed on some others. And it's been a great, it's been good to hear from some others. I particularly welcome the contribution of the member for Lower and Grangemouth, a great new addition to this place. I think we see here the true voice of the Labour Party. This is the Labour movement at its best sitting opposite me, and I pay them tribute for their campaigning on this topic, the heroes of the movement. We've also got the heroes of the Conservative Party behind me, Knights of the Shires, my good friends. Honoured to listen to them. It's like listening to Edmund Burke when the member for South Holland and the Deepings speaks about duty and responsibility. So I congratulate the Right Honourable Lady and the Right Honourable Gentleman for their work together on this campaign. And it brought, the campaign brought the Westminster Hall debate that's been mentioned a few times, Madam Deputy Speaker, a couple of months ago, a very significant debate. And on that day, as if the product of their work out-popped, fresh and pink, the new minister himself, appointed on that day to this role, as if for the very purpose of answering the question about what should be done for the WASPI women. And there was great hope from him, but I'm afraid to say we were disappointed on that day that he could offer no hope at all. And yet, since then, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have seen a whole series of U-turns which have become fashionable on that bench over there, and who knows what we might hear today from the Minister. Now, I do recognise, and I'm sure he will stress, how difficult it is to address the very complicated circumstances of very many women who have been caught in the changes of the pension age. And it is true, as I'm sure he will say, that the Ombudsman has recognised that there was no direct impact on pensioners' incomes from the maladministration and the miscommunication that the DWP was guilty of in the 2000s. But as members have said, particularly I recognise the point made by the Honourable Member for Strangford, women made decisions about their futures, about their lives, in ignorance of their true circumstances. And it was that failure by the DWP to successfully and appropriately communicate to the women that caused them to make decisions that directly did disadvantage them. And it is simply not credible, and I hope the Minister will not advance this argument, that correspondence from government is somehow essentially pointless, that it has no value, because that would be to suggest there is no point in any government communications by post. Of course, it is the case that women were not advised of the changes in their circumstances, and that it is the government's fault, the government of the day's fault, that that didn't happen. And as many members have said, and I just want to acknowledge the powerful point made by the member for St Albans just now, women deserve so much more, and as she said, our constituents feel that they have been robbed of not just money, but of their dignity in consequence of these decisions. So what is to be done, Madam Deputy Speaker? There have been a series of suggestions about how we might go forward. Just on a point of process, I don't agree with the member for Harrogate and Knaresborough, and I'm concerned that my right honourable friend, I think, seemed to agree with him, that the Ombudsman's report should be effectively binding on government. I don't think that's appropriate. These are sovereign decisions that government, accountable to Parliament, should be making. But I do agree with him and others that these reports should be respected by government, and I feel that that has simply not happened in this case. Happy to give way.
I thank him for giving way. It's becoming a habit of mine intervening on him. He says that the report should be respected, but it shouldn't be binding. What does he have in mind? How would this look?
Well, I'm grateful to him. I think it is absolutely essential that the points made in the Ombudsman's report are fully acknowledged by the government, and I think it is necessary, as I'll explain, that some meaningful redress is made to the victims of the maladministration of DWP. Now, the Honourable Lady suggested that there could be another review into the system by the member for East Ham. I don't think that the magic words Tim's review are going to get the government out of this particular hole. The member has enough on his hands sorting out the mess they've made on benefits. So this is a job for this minister, who's a very clever man. I have great confidence in him. And I think the suggestion of mediation that's been suggested by some honourable members may be usefully taken forward. But as my friend, the member for New Forest East, said, it is simply insulting of the government to make absolutely no redress, no acknowledgement of the injustice that the WASPI women have endured. And it is appropriate that some acknowledgement, some meaningful acknowledgement, is made. It's not for me to rescue the government from the consequences of their own incontinence, their fiscal folly that has got them into the mess that they're in. But it is the case that a whole series of discretionary payments have been made by this government since they came to power. Salary increases for train drivers without any improvement in productivity. The creation of a multi-billion-pound energy company that makes no energy. Paying another country billions of pounds to take away sovereign territory belonging to the UK. And, of course, a whole series of U-turns which have imposed significant new costs on the taxpayer. They've cost £5 billion this week alone in their U-turns. So it is obviously the case that the government can make discretionary payments if it wants to, and these are sovereign decisions that it can make. But crucially, Madam Deputy Speaker, any such decision must be funded. And we saw this week, the government essentially fell apart in consequence of a whole series of bad decisions made in the Treasury when Parliament rose up against the Treasury and demanded change. So the decision-making at the heart of government has been woeful for this last year since Labour have been in office. And I pay tribute to parliamentarians who resisted that this week. Now there is a new opportunity for the government to put right a mistake. And I look forward to hearing how the Minister proposes to do that.
Minister, Torsten Bell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to thank all the honourable members who have spoken powerfully today, and particularly the honourable member for Salford for leading today's debate on behalf of the Backbench Business Committee. This is an important topic that she and I have discussed several times in both public and in private, and I look forward to her closing remarks. Madam Deputy Speaker, when we retire, how comfortable we will be in retirement and in the years leading up to it, not least given the growth in pre-retirement poverty, partly due to ill health, as the member for Mid-Dunbartonshire set out. Those are all crucial questions for all of us. We ask them about ourselves, we ask them about those that we care about. And as this debate has shown, many honourable members rightly ask them about the country as a whole too. We should expect people to have strong views on the state pension age, and we all know women affected by changes since 2010 in particular to that age. Constituents, friends and family. I have declared a family interest on this front before alongside my professional one.
Of course. I thank the Minister for giving way. I too have many constituents. I've held up the banner saying I stand with WASPI women. My honourable friend from Salford has laid out where we can find money from. Surely what we can do is promise to revisit this when the public purse allows, rather than letting down these women who have been let down over and over again. Justice delayed is justice denied.
Yes.
Well, I always thank my honourable friend for her contribution. She makes a powerful case. I'll come on to Sally, to the reasons why we don't agree with the case she's made, but I understand the point she is making. But as more broadly, I'll make some progress and then I'll, of course, give way. This is a cohort of women who have too often faced discrimination in the world of work, with lasting effects on the value of their workplace pensions, and who bear the brunt of an unequally borne caring responsibilities. And as the Honourable Member for Salford set out also for her historically very unequal state pension when it comes to gender, that at least has been addressed, but the workplace pension divide remains as big as ever. I shall give way.
Thank you for giving way. I should also declare that my mum is a WASPI woman, and she'd be disappointed if I weren't here today, and there's nothing worse than your mum being disappointed in you. So but I also represent 6,030 other WASPI women in my constituency. I just wonder if the Minister really understands the discrimination that 1950s women have faced, including sexism and lots of discrimination in the workplace as well. They just feel let down, and whether the Minister realises that and realises that they absolutely deserve justice for that.
Well, I thank my right honourable friend for his question. I know, without having met her, that his mum won't be disappointed in him, and obviously the point he makes is absolutely right, and it's just the point I was making, that I think we're all aware of the experiences that this generation of women have had to face, not just in the labour market outset, but much more broadly. So he makes a powerful case, as always. Now, there is broad consensus that it is right to equalise the state pension age for men and women. But the acceleration of the state pension age increases by the Conservative and Liberal Democrat coalition was more politically controversial. And I wasn't going to mention this, but I will gently remind Liberal Democrat members who have spoken today, particularly the honourable members for Eastleigh and Lewis, who used particularly strong language on this point, that it was the choice made by their party. And not to mention that acceleration at all, I think does not. But if you're going to use strong language about difficult choices, then you need to reflect on the choices that came to that point. And my party opposed that at the time. However, neither the acceleration nor the longer planned increases to the SPA legislated for since 1995 were matters that the Ombudsman investigated. This matters when it is the desirability of those original policy decisions made by previous governments that are most frequently referred to by campaigners and by honourable members, including honourable members today, for example, the honourable member for Stratford, who is focusing on the increases in the state pension age themselves. In contrast, it is how those changes were communicated by the Department for Work and Pensions that was the Ombudsman's focus, as the honourable member for West Hertfordshire pointed out very clearly. As all honourable members know, we carefully considered the Ombudsman's findings, as we always will, given their important role, as the member for South Holland and the Deeping set out today and has set out in several debates that I have shared with him in recent months, of course.
No party, indeed no previous government, can be excused in this respect, because this covers the period of office of several governments. The difference is that his party, in opposition, said, I quote, "This injustice can't go on. I've been a long-standing supporter of the WASPI campaign. Labour will compensate WASPI women. It's their money." That was a combination of the current Work and Pension Secretary and the current Deputy Prime Minister.
Minister.
Well, I know my honourable friend has been a much longer member of this House than me, and so he knows how this works, which is that parties set out manifestos, and I'm sure he'll go and look at the Labour Party's 2024 manifesto, and he shall find different words to the ones he's just shared with this House just now. But let me make some progress. We agree that letters should have been sent sooner. We have apologised, and we will learn the lessons from that. However, as honourable members and campaigners on this issue are well aware, we do not agree with the Ombudsman's approach to injustice or to remedy. Neither, if you read carefully between the lines when listening to the honourable member for East Wiltshire, does the opposition. He speaks very eloquently as always, but let us look at what the Ombudsman said when they made their decision to lay their report before Parliament. It was not looking ahead to what a future government might do. It was because they knew that the then Conservative government would have come to a similar conclusion. Because remember, that long debate over those years between the government and the Ombudsman was held in private. So they knew what the approach was of the government and the Parliament they were talking to in a way that those of us outside government at the time could not have done. Now, the honourable members for Harrogate and Knaresborough and for New Forest East asked about the decision not to accept an Ombudsman's findings, and they're right to say that that is unusual, but it is definitely not unprecedented. And I should spell out that the government has accepted other Ombudsman's findings since. So it is not right to say that this is some kind of fundamental break in the approach by government. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, an important, of course.
I thank the Minister for giving way. Earlier in the debate, the member for Hazen-Harlington warned us that we might see simply a regurgitation from the front bench today on behalf of the government. So can I ask the Minister, can he clarify, has he been sent here to defend the indefensible, or is he going to give us something new today?
Well, the honourable member is welcome to choose his tone. I'll come on to the end of my comment, but my job is to come and explain the government's decision and to be held accountable for it. And that is what I'm doing today, and I'm going to continue to do that over the course of these remarks. And it's right that we're then asked questions about that. That is the nature of this democracy, as the honourable member for East Wiltshire set out just now. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, an important consideration when making this decision was that evidence showed that sending people unsolicited letters is unlikely to affect what they knew, which is why letters are sent, but they are sent as part of wider communication campaigns. This evidence was not properly considered by the Ombudsman. Another consideration was that the great majority of 1950s-born women were aware that the state pension age was changing, if not their specific state pension age, as several honourable members have pointed out. The honourable member for Salford refers again to the 43% statistics referring to the 2024 rather than 2023 survey, but as she will know, that refers to all women, including some women as young as 16. When you look at the cohort of women born in the 1950s, the figure is far, far higher than that. On these and other grounds, we rejected the Ombudsman approach to injustice and remedy. Members are aware that litigation is live, so I'm not going to go into lots more detail on the research evidence, which is the core of that litigation. But let me just say that our decision was based on published research that was robust and met professional standards. And second, that the same awareness research that the honourable member for New Forest East was disparaging about. The Ombudsman is clear, of course.
Very grateful to him. Can he just explain to the House why not one single speech in this debate until his is taking the line that he is taking, and that everyone who's spoken in this debate believes that some compensation, at least symbolically, should be paid?
I thank the honourable member for his intervention. I mean, I'm a Liberal man, and people will come to different views on the evidence. There are many members in this House who have campaigned powerfully on this issue over many years, and I respect the work they have done on that. And I'm setting out a different view to the one that the honourable member has taken, and that is the nature of policy choices. It is the nature of accountability, and it's the nature of this debate today. Now, the Ombudsman is clear that redress and compensation should normally reflect individual impact, as it did in the case of the Equitable Life Compensation Scheme that an honourable member mentioned. And they spell out the challenges of assessing the individual circumstances of 3.5 million women, not least given it took the Ombudsman nearly 6 years to look at just 6 cases. The reality is that assessing them would take thousands of staff very many years. We gave a detailed thought to whether we could design a fair and feasible compensation scheme. However, most of the schemes suggested would not focus on those women who lost opportunities as a result of the delay in sending letters. Rule-based schemes, such as suggested by the Select Committee, would make payments on the basis of the likes of age rather than to injustice. Simply paying a flat rate to all 3.5 million women born in the 1950s, irrespective of any injustice, is also hard to justify. Fundamentally, though, our decision was not driven only by cost, to answer directly the honourable member for Falkirk's question, but by the fact that we do not agree with the Ombudsman's approach to injustice or remedy for the reasons I have set out. Indeed, our commitment to pensioners can be seen in the significant fiscal investments we are making in our priorities for pensioners, raising the state pension and rescuing the NHS. Of course,
I have an awful lot of affection for the honourable member. Is there any difference between this speech and the one in Westminster Hall? So it doesn't look as though there is. He might as well just send us the tape from the last one.
Well, he's demonstrated more affection on previous occasions, is all I would gently is what I would gently say to that. But if he's asking me, has the government's position changed? If the honourable gentleman is asking me, has the government's position changed, then I'm afraid the answer to him, from his perspective, is not. But moving, of course.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. A few moments ago, the Minister said that the government had concluded that it would not be appropriate to apply a flat rate to all 3.8 million women. Has the government done any modelling at all about paying a flat rate to any other smaller cohorts within that 3.8 million women, for example, women on pension credit or under a certain level of income or savings?
I thank the honourable lady for her question, and I think we've discussed versions of this question before. Yes, there have been positions of models that may have focused on a subset of women, for example, those on pension credit, but that still comes up against the fundamental challenge of payments based on some other qualifying condition, in this case income, not on the injustice that has been suffered. And that is the case that the Ombudsman set out that compensation was due for, the injustice, not just the virtue of being a 1950s women. Now, none of what I've... Of course. And then I will wrap up before I lose...
I'm grateful for the Minister for giving away again. He will be aware that in other compensation schemes there are often waves of compensation. So the first wave of compensation can be on one indicator, with a second wave where it looks at other complicating factors. Has the government looked at that model?
Yeah. Well, I would just refer the honourable lady to our very, very detailed response published in December, which runs through over a number of pages, and I will send her the relevant extracts, the conclusions we have considered. I'm going to conclude now because I'm running up against the patience of the very patient Deputy Speaker. Now, none of what I say, I recognise, is likely to change the minds of many members here, as the honourable member has kindly pointed out to me, as he's always kind to do. And I know that not least because I see many familiar faces from similar debates, as the even more friendly honourable member friend behind me has pointed out from debates in Westminster Hall. Nor are the campaigners, whose tenacity has been clear for all to see and has been attested to sufficiently today, likely to be satisfied. They are right to continue to point to the wider context that society has been far from universally kind to women born in the 1950s, as they have wrestled with discrimination in the labour market and beyond, as the honourable member for Ceredigion-Presley set out earlier. Nothing regarding the case I have set out today diminishes any of that. However, the government has made its decision, and we owe it to everybody to be clear about. It is right that honourable members hold us to account for it, as the member for East Wiltshire has set out. That has happened today and in other debates in this House and Westminster Hall. And as I have said before, there are lessons for the department to learn, and learn them we will. We will also continue to support women born in the 1950s and pensioners more generally, not least by raising the state pension and by turning around our NHS. I know that they and honourable members will expect nothing less. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Rebecca Long-Bailey to wind up.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I just want to thank the whole range of colleagues who've spoken in today's debate. I think it's been a fantastic and collegiate debate, and it shows the House at its best. And this continues outside of the chamber. For those who are watching, it's a campaign that brings so many of us together. And there are so many formidable campaigners in this chamber today who need to be celebrated. Now, I know the Minister is in a really difficult position, and as I say, I've got a lot of time for him. And I know he's bound by the government's current position on this. But some of the information that has been given within his speech, so for example, he refers to me referring to a piece of research from 2024. It's actually 2003, and that's the research that the Ombudsman themselves rely on when they say that 43% of women didn't know that they were, when their state pension age was increasing. Again, he makes the point about letters being ineffective, and must understand that to people watching today, it's a really absurd thing to say, despite the fact that I know that he says that DWP research states that, but the research is absurd. It doesn't really have any basis in reality. And I don't want the honourable gentleman to go down in history as the man who denied justice for the 1950s women. I honestly don't. I want to see action on this, and I want him to go down as the person who finally managed to award them justice. But at the moment, he's got to understand that the arguments being put forward by the government are absurd, to say the least. In fact, they're akin to somebody arguing that the world is flat in denying the Ombudsman's report. I will.
It's certainly not arguments the Resolution Foundation would put forward when he was the director of it.
No, the honourable gentleman's right, and it's not. And that's why I've got so much hope placed in the Minister to take action on this. But just to conclude, there were two statements made by colleagues that stood out today for me. The first was from the Right Honourable Member for South Holland and the Deepings, who just said, in the name of decency, justice must be done. The Minister must recognise that. So get round the table with the women and present a package before Parliament that we can all support and celebrate. And as the Honourable Member for Hayes and Harlington said, we're not going to give up until justice is done, and neither are the women. Thank you.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. We'll now give the front benches a few moments to swap over.